So in the last class, we were studying about what is the difference between civil engineering and architecture and what are the commonalities between the two. When you're talking about the civil engineering as such, we discussed that civil engineering has got a different field and architecture has got a different field, but there are certain areas where are they are common. Now, and both of them are required at the same time. That's also true कि दोनों की जरूरत हमें है. It's not कि architects can do all the work and the civil engineers can do all the work. So now there has to be a proper classification of what are the works done by the architect. Now, how does an architect work? Architect works on basis of the principles of architecture. I'll be sending you certain books from which you can just relate this. What here I will be doing in the class, I'll be just going through the basics. So there are two forms of architecture. One is the uh, which I told you last time, the ancient architecture. That was followed by the medieval architecture, and today we have the contemporary or the modern architecture. Now, coming to today, the contemporary or the modern architecture. What is the contemporary architecture and what are the features and what are the forms that we have for the contemporary architecture? I'll just be going through certain figures. When you search contemporary architecture in Google, this is what you will get. It's a modern architecture, the modern shape of architecture. Now, there are so many forms and formations and features here. And this I told you last time, architecture basically has to do something with shapes, with forms, and with the features of the building. So I told you last time in the last class that modern architecture is not based on the form and feature of the roof, form and feature of the dome, but it's also based on the form and feature of the overall building. Now, when you are seeing all these pictures here, what are you, what do you get to know that it's actually the overall building form has changed in the contemporary architecture. So contemporary architecture would, if you can just go through these are just cubicles, but let me go into detail into some of them, just to give you an idea what a contemporary architecture actually means. You have the first thing in this is, let me transport this. What is first visible? Now, any one of you who wants to speak? Yes, Muzaffar, what is visible?
It's shape, different shapes that are blended together to form a new art.
What are the various shapes? First of all, there is this shape, a rectangle here. That's
Rectangle.
this is another rectangle. Then इसके पीछे एक और rectangle नजर आ रहा है. ये एक और रेक्टेंगल नजर आ रहा है, इसके पीछे एक और रेक्टेंगल नजर आ रहा है. So it's when you look at this building, these are the shapes that are visible to you when you are visualizing the building. आपको different rectangles इसमें नजर आ रहे हैं. Now all those rectangles are placed in such a manner that the building is getting an overall effect. उसे हम कहते हैं, that is known as effect. Now what is effect? Effect is तो उससे what do you get to actually the final formation जो आपको नजर आ रही है उसको हम effect कहते हैं. अब यहाँ पर फाइनल फॉर्मेशन इस पूरी बिल्डिंग की आपको एक डायनेमो इफेक्ट जैसा लग रहा है. डायनेमोस देखिए ना आपने, किस क्या कहते हैं उसको, डायनेमोस या डायनेमोस. तो one is standing dynamo, another is sitting dynamo, this is another one, then this is standing dynamo. So you are actually getting a dynamo effect in formation of this building. The shape is cuboidal actually, but when you look at it from a particular angle, you are able to see a rectangular grid, and the overall effect of this building is a dynamo sort of effect. So there are forms to every building. This is one of the forms that I'm just trying to explain to you in the contemporary architecture, where the form and its effect, these are two important things. You can write this down. Well, I'm just dictating this to you. Every structure has got a form. Every architectural structure has got a form and effect. Form is a property of a structure, is an architectural property of a structure, is an architectural property of a structure that form is an architectural property of a structure that has an effect on the overall behavior of the structure. Form reflects the patterns in a structure and also the shapes of the structure. Effect gives the those combinations produce a particular effect. अब ये इफेक्ट आर्किटेक्चरल ही नहीं होगा, मैं इसको जोड़ना चाहता हूँ सिविल इंजीनियरिंग के साथ. When you are taking any structure, for example, let me just try to If the structure is quite simple, this is a rectangular structure. When you are looking at it from the front, this is what your structure looks like. What is the civil engineering effect of a structure? Its effect on the nature of the load transfer, which is one vertical and then lateral. For both vertical and lateral forces, this sort of symmetrical rectangular structure would be very good. Because this sort of structure has got a not it has got a simple geometry, and simple geometries behave quite well in transmission of loads. That's the civil engineering part of it. Now, for example, if this would be a structure, one placed over the other, two cubites, and this is what the architectural form that you are getting. Now, you can see that most of the load vertically is concentrated at the center of this building and not towards the ends, because the most of the load will go through the center of this building. So similarly for the earthquake considerations, because the mass of the two stories now here would be different, so the reaction will also be different. So again, in terms of civil engineering, such type of structures are not feasible when you are talking about earthquake considerations, wind considerations. So architecture, a very good architecture would be the simplest architecture. From the point of view of a civil engineer, as a civil engineer कह रहा हूँ, the structure which would have a simple architecture, जिसकी form बिल्कुल simple है, somewhat like this rectangular or somewhat like this. So because these are quite symmetrical structures, somewhat like this or somewhat like the triangle, these are the simple structures which are, so these types of form of structures from the civil engineering point of view. So what should be the form of the structure from the civil engineering point of view? The form of the structure should be simple. So whenever you consult an architect, you do not advise the architect to go for complex structures. But if it's a requirement कि complex structure बनाना है, then there are a lot of complications involved in such sort of structure. So the civil engineering then has to deal with a lot of problems and has to come up with many solutions in that case. So first thing that a civil engineer tells the architect is keep the structural form simplest. लेकिन अगर यही होता तो medieval architecture में जिसने ताजमहल बनाया, if now the architect who was involved in that, ताजमहल का की picture लगाता हूँ. Just come to this and look at this. The base, the foundation of this is simple, rectangular, and when you look at the main building of the mausoleum, what you see is a symmetrical pattern in the main building. Yes, the dome at the center would add up the load at the center. Even in this case, the architect has not changed the form considerably, keeping the basic structure almost cuboidal, थोड़े थोड़े से offsets लिए हैं towards the corners, but he has used styles. Form तो simple है. It's basically, if you look at it from the face of it, it looks rectangular and with the dome at the top. So the form is simple. Then comes the style. Now, what is the style and what are different styles? Now, these are the styles. One is the offset, जो इसने use किया है, and then the style, the offset has, offset मतलब the area is या तो वो एरिया पीछे जा रहा है या तो आगे आ रहा है, तो इट्स एन ऑफसेट. सो ये यूनिकली फिर नजर आ जाता है ये पोर्शन जहां पर ऑफसेट है. तो देन उसी में ये छोटी छोटी खिड़कियां ऑफसेट्स काट के, एंड अब उसमें फिर पैटर्न्स दिए हैं. द स्टाइल has an offset and offset has got patterns. What are the patterns here visible here? The pattern visible here is an arc. This is the pattern which is an arc. So that resembles the style within the windows and of the main entrance door. Then when you go into the dome, you're just seeing the simple configuration of the dome. Nothing unique in the dome. But adding up small effects, which is the final thing in the architecture, adding the final effects is the role of an architect. So the structure and its form is simple, symmetrical. It's simple, it's symmetrical, so it's very good for the design for an earthquake engineer or for a structural engineer point of view. That's why this building still stands, because its structure is quite simple, but it's also unique. What is the uniqueness of the structure? Every structure should have its own uniqueness. Now, what is uniqueness? Uniqueness is it does. So, this is an effect. How has this been done? This depends on the location from which you are actually viewing the structure. So, in architecture, the location from which you are where you are placing your focal point, from where you are checking the form of the structure, that is very important. So in architecture, you have three things: the form or shape, what you call as shape, then you have the features or patterns, and finally you have the effect, which is the final product. It depends on आप कहाँ से इसको देख रहे हो. Now, if this camera was not placed here, और इस कैमरा को यहाँ पर कहीं पर place करते हैं at this point, and if this structure was seen from some other point, for example from here, and looking onto this, it would not give you the same uh, form. This is not force, this is form. It will not give you the same form, the same shape. You cannot see the same form and shape, and you will not see the same effect. So form and shape and effect are related with the loci point. So it depends on the focal or the loci point from which, about which there is a formation. There is a formation. That's why when you look at a structure, you usually check the structure from a pictorial viewpoint. आप एक स्ट्रक्चर को जब विजुलाइज करते हो पिक्टोरियल व्यू पॉइंट से, that is usually taken from somewhere at an angle between these two corners. Most of the structures are designed by an architect in such a manner, but it depends on it depends on many other things. Number one, it depends on face of the structure. एक स्ट्रक्चर का फेस कहाँ की ओर है? फॉर एग्जाम्पल ये बिल्डिंग है जो मैं आपको अभी दिखा रहा हूँ, तो इसके सामने ही डोर होगा, यहाँ पर कहीं एंट्रेंस डोर, एक सामने एक गार्डन है, एंड देन you are going inside, so the face of the structure is this towards the garden. और इसके पीछे पूरा जंगल है, राइट साइड से जंगल है, पीछे जंगल है, तो the face of the structure will not be towards जहां से you don't have to view the structure all the time. So the back of the structure in this case is towards जहां से visualization उतनी नहीं हो रही है. So it depends on the face of the structure. Where is the face of the structure? In some cases, the face of the structure could be multi-dimensional faces. It could be multi-dimensional face. It's not that the face will be only one. It could be multi-dimensional. And even when you are looking at an angle like this, जो मैंने यहाँ पर दिखाया, towards this building, so the right side as well as this, the front face both should have the form and the shape as well as the effect. So the faces could be many, or the face could be just one for a structure. Then it depends on what is the environment behind it and what's the background behind it. What is the background visible to you in this structure? यहाँ पर the open skies and a tree here. That's the background that's visible to you when you're looking for the face. Right? But the background could change. Let me check if I can find more backgrounds. That this structure is complementing the background hai, there is a triangular formation in the background. To complement that, similar formation has been done. लेकिन कैमरा कहाँ पर रखा गया है? There is a water in the foreground here, so nobody would look पानी में जाके वो इसका फ्रंट नहीं देखेगा. So there will be a pathway on the sidewalks of this, जहाँ पर ये पानी है, स्टैंडिंग वाटर है, तो उसके साइड में एक साइडवॉक होगा, तो जो भी इस स्ट्रक्चर को देखेगा वहीं से देख पाएगा. So everything is complementing, the background is complementing with respect to जहां से visualize इसको करना है. So the focal point here is somewhere जहां पर एक सड़क चल रही है, so that becomes the face there. Face does not mean कि ये पानी को फेस कर रहा है तो मैं स्ट्रक्चर की फॉर्मेशन उस हिसाब से बना लूं. The face means where are you actually looking at the structure from, which is the predominant location from where you are looking at the structure. तो यहाँ पर predominant location एक sidewalk है, वहां से जब आप इस स्ट्रक्चर को देखोगे तो then you are able to visualize the structure in such a unique manner. So not only is the background important, so the first thing was the face, second thing background, third thing is the foreground. Like for example, you are taking this one. What is in the foreground? The foreground is the water, the background is just open skies, but foreground is very important because it now what is the property of a water? It there will be waves in the water at times. At times, the water will be standing at one place. So, to complement that, the structure has got जो इसके basic formation है at its lower level, that is complementing the standing water. And जो ऊपर वाले formations है, which are the patterns made by through unique property of जो ये flowers से ही निकला है and from the shells of the this pattern is from the shell and from the flowers, so it's complementing with the water and it's also resembling with the wave formation जब होगी इसमें पानी में it will also complement that, तो interaction उसके साथ इसकी हो रही है. Now this is the modern contemporary architecture. It deals with these three important things and they depend on what I told you. Further, they depend on the face of the structure, they depend on the background of the structure, and they depend on the foreground of the structure. So, what are the three things? The form and the shape, the features of the patterns, and the final effect. So, now there could be innumerable number of formations that you could make, but what I told you is that as a civil engineer, you do not go for a structure which has got complex geometry. For example, this one. Now, this is a complex geometry. This is यहाँ पर लिखा भी है rethinking the future, constructing structures over the structures. So, but do you go for such a complex geometry? Geometries like these, जहाँ पर base uh, is narrow and as you go towards the top, it's getting wider and wider. As a civil engineer, you have to check whether such formations, these complex formations, are needed. Do you need to go for such complex formations, or can you just deal with the simple formations? और वो भी काफी impressive लगते हैं. So it's लेकिन हर किसी की अपनी